On Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We turn now to a remarkable investigation into law enforcement's unregulated use of young confidential informants in drug cases. On Monday, New Yorker staff writer Sarah Stillman won a George Polk Award for her 8-month investigation on the topic. Her article is called The Throwaways, and it spurred calls for reform in several states, including most recently Washington State, where new legislation regulating the use of drug informants is underway. In her article, Stillman describes how police broker deals with young, untrained informants to perform high-risk operations with few legal protections in exchange for leniency. The results can be fatal. One such informant, Detroit teenager Shelley Hilliard, was murdered after being caught by police with less than an ounce of marijuana and agreeing to set up her drug dealer in order to avoid prosecution. This is Shelley's mother, Lenice Nelson.
It's like they just threw her away. They didn't even care, because it's just the way she said it to me, the way her tone, she was like, I'm scared. What do? I said, you got to protect yourself, because I knew they didn't care about her. She could have went to jail for that ounce, but she said, they made me sign my name. They made me be an informant. I was like, so where's the police now? She said, they gone. They made her do that, and they left her in the room.
That was Lenice Nelson, the mother of a teenage informant who was murdered when trying to set up her drug dealer in order to avoid prosecution for less than an ounce of marijuana possession. By some estimates, up to 80% of all drug cases in America involve such informants.
Journalist Sarah Stillman writes about another confidential informant, Rachel Hoffman, a 23-year-old Florida State student who had just earned admissions to a master's program in mental health counseling when cops found drugs in her apartment. To get off the hook, she agreed to assist the cops in a major undercover deal involving meeting 2 convicted felons alone in her car to buy 2.5 ounces of cocaine, 1,500 ecstasy pills, and a semi-automatic handgun. Within days, Rachel Hoffman's body was found shot 5 times in the chest and head with the gun that the police had sent her to buy.
We're joined right now by Rachel's mother, joining us from the Tampa studios, PBS studios of WEDU. If you could tell us, Margie Weiss, what happened to your daughter? Go back to 2007.
2008 is when she was murdered, and in 2007 she just before she graduated FSU, and she also had a major in criminal justice as well as psychology. They stopped her because she had been driving 8 miles over the speed limit. She went to FSU, Florida State University, and they arrested her because they found 25 grams of pot, which is less than an ounce, and the law is if you have over 20 grams, I believe it's a felony. And she went into drug court, and she was to graduate it in April of 2008. And when she graduated and was ready to come home in August, her lawyer told us, he called us 2 days before she was supposed to move home, that she had to stay in Tallahassee to be able to get her record expunged, which is what we wanted, because she was going to go on for her master's degree in counseling and work towards becoming a psychologist and work with kids. And that never got to happen because they raided her apartment, and apparently she was getting pot for her and her friends. And they found 5 ounces, which is less than what this cup would hold. And her father and I were unaware of any of this going on. And when they raided her apartment, the officer said, we can make all this go away if you work for us. And she said okay, because she did not want to shame her family. The problem with, I want to digress and give you my opinion about it, but after that, she called me, and I had just come back from Passover, and she was supposed to come with me. But she was home at a funeral, and she missed a urine test, and they threw her in jail that weekend, which was a month before they raided her apartment. And I think it was like to scare her so that later down the road, before her probation was complete, they could do something like this. I don't know. It's just, I became suspicious after she was murdered. And
so tell us
she
what
called me
happened
after that,
when...
and she said, "Mom, I want you to surround me with your love and light because I'm thinking of doing something dangerous." And I paused and I said, "Rachel, did you just hear what you said? You know, what are you talking about? Don't do it. But what is it that you're talking about? If you know ahead of time that you're going to do something dangerous, that's enough evidence to tell you not to do it." And she goes, "Well, you know how I'm a criminal justice major? I thought it'd be really cool to like write a book about, you know, working undercover and exposing what it's all about." And I said, "That's the craziest thing I've ever heard you tell me." I said, "Don't do it." And she said, "Mom, don't worry, I'll be fine." And I said, "Don't do it." And all I knew was the word undercover. At that time, I didn't know informant. I didn't know the word snitch for like at least 2 years after that. And she said, "Well, I'll call you on Monday. We're going to do it on Monday, and I'll talk, you know, I'll tell you what's going on the whole way through." And apparently that was the first time and the only time that they used her before she was murdered. And when she called me, the policeman was there in the car. His name was Pooh Bear. And she was talking to him and giggling and acting like it was just an adventure, and that he had her back and he would keep her safe, and then it was all over. And I was certain that since she told me about it and he knew that I knew, that it really was all over. So when they called me a month later at 3 in the morning and said my daughter was missing, I thought, well, maybe she's at a festival or maybe she's with a friend, because I had been called by her father at Thanksgiving time, and she was at a festival, and I found her through her friends. So I started calling her friends, and I said, "Do I need to come up to Tallahassee?" And they said, "No, not at this time." Now, she had been murdered at 7 o'clock on Wednesday, and they were calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning on Thursday. And I just went into shock, and I was like in shock for probably the next 2 years. But at about 8 or 9 in the morning, officer, I believe his name was Odom, called me and said, "You can come up now." And I didn't get out of the house till 11. And, you know, what was weird was a half a year before my father died, and they called me, and I was out of the house in 15 minutes. So that's why I think I was in shock. And I told my husband, and he was ready to follow me up there. And I said, "No, she's going to be okay. She's going to be okay." And I talked to her father. I talked to her best friends. I was searching for her. And so I drove up, and when I got near Perry, which is where they found her body in a ditch, which was another county out of Tallahassee, the victim's advocate was talking to me, Kim Powell, and she said, I can't remember the exact words, but she said they might find Rachel's, you know, with her missing, they might just find her body. And I said, "Are you saying that that's a possibility or probability?" Meaning one would mean yes and one would mean no. And I had to hang up the phone, and I just screamed as loud and as long as I could. And I was hoarse from it. And I drove up to the, and then I called my husband, and I said, "Come." So he hurried up, and the rabbi hurried up, and her father was a half hour behind me, and I got to the police department in Tallahassee, and the victim's advocate, Kim Powell, was there, and she saw me in, and there were 4 or 5 police officers escorting me into the narcotics division, and I thought that was odd because she was a missing person. And we sat down and they asked me if I wanted to, wait for Irv to show up, her father, before I spoke with them, and I said yes, because he's more clear about following the conversation, and I didn't want to say, anything that I didn't have a witness to. Anyway, I was just numb. I was just in shock. And they said, well, she's missing, and they didn't tell us anything about what had happened, that they had used her as an informant, how she had died. I found out about the gunshot wound 6 weeks later on her death certificate. I didn't know where. I didn't know how many. I found that out 2 years later during Danilo Bradshaw's, the accomplice, I believe.
Margie, I want to turn to
a speedy trial because he felt that he was innocent because it was his stepbrother-in-law that they found the blood on his pants.
Margie, I want to turn to Tampa police officer David McCraney. Here's how he described what went wrong in your daughter Rachel Hoffman's case.
She was told to stay in a certain location. We have protocols that were in place that would keep her safe at that location. She then decided to leave and meet them on her own, and the investigator, the case investigator in charge, communicated with her on the phone and told her, do not leave, pleaded with her not to leave, do not go meet them. Our stance is your safety, the safety of the public, is far more important than any drug deal. We can always make another drug deal. So we pleaded with her not to leave. She was able to leave before we could stop her, and decided to meet them on her own.
I want to turn now to Sarah Stillman, who is a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine. She just won a George Polk Award for magazine reporting for her piece, The Throwaways, that came from an 8-month investigation into how law enforcement uses young confidential informants. Talk about how Rachel's story, as her mom, Margie Weiss, describes it, fits into this bigger picture, and what you learned happened with Rachel. What was the encounter that led to her death?
Yeah. Well, part of what really stood out about Rachel's case is that, here she was, this young woman found with some pot, and I believe a small handful of ecstasy pills. And she was sent off ultimately to buy 1,500 ecstasy pills, a stash of cocaine, and a handgun from 2 convicted felons. Ultimately, in the midst of the sting, the police lost track of her. As often happens in these situations, she was told to go to a second location. And when she did that, ultimately, one of the men found the wires, the surveillance wires that the police had hidden in her purse, and shot her.
In her purse?
Exactly. They were hidden in her purse, which some police would argue was sort of against the conventional protocols of the safest place to put the wires. But they opened the purse to essentially to stage a robbery, to steal the money in the purse, and then she was killed.
And Sarah Stillman, how different is Rachel Hoffman from the typical confidential informant whom you profile in your New Yorker piece?
I think demographically she may not be the most representative insofar as, many of the people who find themselves in these very vulnerable situations do not necessarily kind of have a college education, do not necessarily have, parents who are looking out for them, who also, afterwards really stand up and speak out, as Margie and Irv Hoffman have done, really getting out there to really fight for reforms, to say, we've heard so many stories from people around the country who have faced really similar things, without protection, young people, sometimes teenagers, sometimes people as young as 15 years old, going out there into these very dangerous situations, and ultimately, kind of, Rachel's parents have really fought for legislation to try to change this in Florida, and hopefully at some point around the country.
We're going to go to break and then come back to this conversation. We'll be joined by a professor who's written a book on this subject, and staying with Sarah Stillman as we hear the story not only of Rachel Hoffman, but of other young people who become informants and what happens to them. Who is responsible for them? Who is responsible for their lives? This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. Back in a minute. Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.